Welcome to the Afterlife podcast. This is your host, Puja Chilakuri. Today, my guest is AJ Parr. AJ is an internationally recognized spiritual journalist and author, a member of the Institute for the Scientific Study of Consciousness. He has authored over 20 spiritual books on spirituality and comparative religion, including 2 on near death experiences. He hosts the AJ Parr Spiritual Journalist YouTube channel, where he has interviewed over 100 near death experiencers. He presently is a facilitator and moderator for the International Association for Near Death Studies, also known as IANS, as well as the administrator of the Facebook public group Near Death Experiences and Spiritual Awakening, which has over 140,000 members. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on this show today, AJ.
Thank you, Pooja, for inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Without wasting any time, I would like us to just dive right into it. So, my first question for you today is what sparked your interest in pursuing this research on near death experiences?
Well, originally, I had an experience in 1991, which I woke up in the middle of the night. I found myself in this dark space. Back then, I did not know much about NDEs. I had seen the movie Life After Life based on Raymond Moody's book, but I was not really aware of these things. So I still don't know if I stopped breathing. I think I did. But the thing is, I suddenly found myself in this very dark space. I could not even see my hands. I raised them and I couldn't see them. So what I did was I tried to see something. And then I thought, wow, this is so dark that there could be someone hiding here and I would never know. So by thinking that, I started getting scared because, wow, it's like a kid when he enters a dark room. Your imagination starts playing tricks on you. So I got really scared, and all of a sudden, I heard a voice. So I was right. There was someone there. And this voice said, surrender, all is one. At once, without me doing anything, I relaxed and I felt my chest expanding. It started growing and growing and growing. It grew larger than myself. It grew larger than the room. It grew larger than everything around me. And all of a sudden, I appeared in what seemed to be an infinite star. I was the star. I could see up and down to the right, to the left, in all directions at the same time. I could see the center of the star. I could see each ray of light extending everything at once. I could even see that each ray of light was surrounded by a small empty space which it occupied and separated each ray from the nearest ones. So, this sensation of the empty space was complete. I could perceive it in that infinity which made up the star. So, the star, when I was there, I felt I was full of light, but I was also the empty space that occupied that star. So this was contradictory. And at the same time, I had no memory of ever being me. I was pure consciousness. I had no thoughts, but I had awareness. I had complete awareness. And I felt that I was everything that existed and that I was light. So I don't know how long this took because you lose track of time. But when I woke up, I gasped for air and then I held my head with my hands and said, what? What just happened? But the memory was so fresh that I could still feel myself there. I couldn't understand it. So I got up from my bed, looked around my room, my bedroom, and I could still feel that I was one with everything. So I went to the nearest wall. I pressed my hand against the wall, and I could feel I was the hand pressing against the wall. But I was also the wall pressing back. I could feel my consciousness in the wall pressing back. So this was really, really, really shocking. It blew my mind and I really couldn't understand it. And this feeling persisted for 1 or 2 days, maybe three, but it gradually diminished. So the second night, I was asking myself, what happened? I mean, I was really blown away. And I felt a presence. It was a presence. I felt this was like a very old man. And he came up or I couldn't see him, but I felt him. And he sort of gave me an explanation, but I felt it more like a download rather than hearing it. And it was a 5-line poem that explained to me everything. So I was really shocked. So the poem went like this: In the beginning was the one, but the one was alone and he wanted to play. So he divided himself into two and gave number two amnesia, and thus the game began. So after hearing this, I realized that this was not only the explanation of where I had been in the one, but it was also like the creation story, the origin of this reality that we know, which we know it is a realm of dualism or of duality. But this explanation was so intense that I started looking for more explanations. So I had always been interested in religion. I had many spiritual books, scripture. I had been a Freemason. I had studied transcendental meditation. I had always been into uh, studying ancient religions, mostly focused on Christianity, but not on the regular religious Christianity, more focused on the spiritual teachings behind Christianity. So I said, wow, is there any way that this is? I felt that that was the secret teaching behind all religions, the secret teaching behind everything. You know, that's explanation of the one dividing himself into two and giving himself amnesia. So I said, wow. So when I got the first thing I did was I got the gospel and I started looking at it. And in the gospels, I found several things like the truth shall set you free. Mhm. And also things like God is light. Even Jesus said, I am the light of the world. So I started understanding that maybe there was something. And then I also found that Jesus said, I and my Father are one. So that sort of gave me an explanation that, or made me assume that perhaps Jesus also knew about this wisdom of oneness. Okay. And in part of the Gospels, he also mentions that he wants his followers to be one with God. And I started wondering if the other religions would also talk about this. So I started. One of my favorite books was the Bhagavad Gita, which is from the Hindus. And in Bhagavad Gita, there is a part where Krishna tells Arjuna, he says that the sun is the symbol of the supreme self. I had been in what seemed to be a star or a sun, so I was blown away. And in the one of the Vedas also talks about the light of consciousness, which is the true light. So I started wondering what was going on. I decided to study different religions. Like I said, I was not into near death experiences back then. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, he who perceives the unity of all things understand that there is one self in all. So that really inspired me to continue. And for many years, I studied different religions, but I never could find, and I joined different religions. I started going to Buddhist groups, Hindu groups, Gnostics, so many. There are so many. And every time I joined one of these groups, first, I knew that I was not going to become a fanatic, that I was only exploring. And second, I always asked the higher members if they had had an experience like mine. And all of them said that they hadn't, and I never could find someone who had had a similar experience until around 4 years ago. I met Tessa Romero. She is a Spanish near death experiencer. And I have a publishing company. I help people publish their books in Amazon. And I also translated her book. So she had to translate her book 24 minutes on the other side. And when I translated her book, I was really astonished because she did mention being in a dark place. She did mention merging with the light. So I started talking to her, and she told me a few things that really made the difference. She said, "Look, I was in that dark place. Near death experiencers call it the void. I was also in that light of oneness. And the experience you had that you could see up and down, to the right, to the left, that is what is known as 300-degree vision. And I think what you had was an NDE." And I said, "Yeah, but I cannot prove that I died." She said, "Well, everything, it seems like you had an NDE." So I said, "Wow, I'm going to," since I'm a journalist and I knew that there were NDE videos out there. So I started watching a few, but then I said, "No, no, no. I'm going to have to start interviewing near death experiencers and talk to them, and see how much I can find out." So I started interviewing experiencers. And so far, I have interviewed over 100 of them. And I have found many commonalities, but I have also found interesting things, For example, I didn't see really a higher being except the light itself. But I found that many people see deities. And so far, people have talked about Jesus, Mother Mary. They have met in their NDEs: Jesus, Mother Mary, Archangel Michael, Buddha, Shiva, Yogananda, Babaji, Saint Germain, Guanjin, Native American elders, demons, extraterrestrials, and even underwater intelligent beings. So I realized that there is a great variety. And at first, I thought that maybe the cultural background of the person had something to do with it. But then I also found atheists who met Jesus or God. And I also interviewed two Jews who met Jesus and were transformed, and even a child with no religion upbringing whom saw Shiva. So I was really blown away. I didn't know what was going on. So my first effort to make sense out of this was I decided to focus exclusively on Christian NDEs first, because I wanted to begin my study on something that I was familiar with. And although I know that a lot of people see other deities from other religions, I decided to focus on that. So that's when I came up with the basis of this book, Stairway to Heaven. In this book, I point out the commonalities I found in a group of 25 near death experiencers. Back then, I only found among the ones that I had interviewed, because this was only like a few months after I started my research, I only found 15 who had had what I call Christian, even though some of them were not Christian. But based on this, I complemented my research with 10 near death experiences I found in the NDERF website, which is the Near Death Experience Research Foundation. This was founded by Jeffrey Long, and it contains thousands of NDE accounts. I chose the 10 that best represented these encounters. So I decided to focus on encounters with Jesus, God, or paradise. So, based on this, after comparing the commonalities, I came up with 9 basic commonalities among these experiences. These are, first of all, meeting the light. A wide number, or most of them, met the light. They not only met the light like I did, which I became the light, but they also had encounters with the light as a conscious being, a conscious higher being that actually spoke to them. So some of them did not become the light. They faced the light, they met the light, and they had conversations with it. Some of them had more than conversation. I'll get to that in a minute. The second characteristic was hearing a voice. In most cases, they heard God's voice either in the light or before the event or during the event. Then the third characteristic is visiting the lobby of heaven. Visiting the lobby of heaven is really important, because when people go there, based on most accounts, they are only allowed to visit part of this heaven, and there is always a boundary. So they can never go beyond that boundary. And two of the people I interviewed in those first 15 called it the lobby of heaven. So, yes, I have found, after interviewing over 100 near death experiencers, that there is always a boundary, a limit. If you want to go beyond that limit, you have to accept that you will not come back. That is actually the world of the dead. So, in this in between realm where people go and have these experiences before crossing the limit, they can be there, they can meet deceased loved ones, they can have encounters with divinities, spiritual guides. However, if they want to cross beyond the limit, they have to decide. And they are told, look, once you cross the limit, you will not be able to come back. So the fourth characteristic was meeting Jesus Christ or some divinities like an angel, archangels, some are archangel. Most usually it's Archangel Michael or other angels. Some have seen Mother Mary, like I mentioned. So this is all different in each case, but that is the fourth characteristic, meeting Jesus Christ or another divinity. Then the fifth characteristic is having a life review. All of a sudden, the person experiences or relives his life, not only from his point of view, but from the point of view of the people he was with. For example, if you are reliving, this is what people told me, I never experienced it, but you remember or you relive the good and the bad you've done to other people. So let's say that you bullied someone when you were in primary school. You will relive that event from your point of view as you were bullying that person, but you can also experience the other person's point of view, the other person, how that person felt when you mistreated them. So this is what is most transformative about these experiences, because when people realize that all the bad they've done it really hurts someone, and when they get to experience how that person felt when they were mistreated, they start learning that whatever you do to others, you're do to yourself. And this takes us back to the golden rule mentioned by Jesus: don't do to others what you would not like others to do to you. This is basically something, like I mentioned, that transforms people. So the sixth common element is getting a chance to return. So after this life review, maybe, and after encountering deceased loved ones, etc., whatever, near the end of the experience, they are either asked, "Do you want to return?" or they are told, "You cannot stay. You have to go." So in the cases where people are allowed to make a decision, sometimes they are shown what would happen if they stayed or what would happen if they returned, and sometimes they are told why they should return. So takes us to the seventh common element, which is glimpsing the future. In many cases, they are said, okay, if you stay and don't go back to the world of the living, this will happen. And they show you your father and your mother crying. They show you what would happen back on earth if you never return. But they can also show you what would happen if you return, and they can show you scenes from the future. This is really hard to believe, but it happens. And these scenes from the future, they had one case in which the experiencer was only like 8 years old, and he was shown his life during the next 50 years, not completely, but some important events that would happen in his future. And so this is something worth considering, that in that realm, time does not seem to be a barrier, and you can actually contemplate what's going to happen in the future. Not only in the future, if you go back, but also what would happen if you never return. So there are like different timelines that you can see. The eighth common element is receiving a mission. This most people, they are, when they agree to come back or when they are told they have to go back, they say they are told, okay, but you have to tell the world that death is not the end, or you have to tell the world that God is love, or you have to tell the world that humanity needs to transform. I don't know. There are so many missions that people receive, but they all are like mandates received in that other realm about their future life. And the ninth common element I found is that once these people return, they come back completely transformed. I have had two cases in which one of them was a police officer who really treated people badly and all that. And when he had his near death experience, he repented and regretted it so much that he was transformed, and now he works helping the homeless. Another case worth mentioning is that is not in the book. It's a man who was sent to prison for attempted murder, and he really misbehaved when he was in prison because his sentence was originally 20 years, and he behaved so bad in prison that they raised it to 30 years. And he had a cardiac arrest in prison, and he had really a shocking life review in which he relived all his wrongdoings. And after that life review, when he came back, he was transformed.
Mhm.
And he stopped swearing. He stopped doing bad things to others. He stopped hanging around with the bad guys. And he became isolated. He started reading. He tried to be in his cell by himself most of the time. And a couple of years later, he was released on parole for good behavior because he changed completely. So after 29 years in prison, he was freed on parole. And this was mainly due to the NDE. There was another case of military police who also, he says he was very strict in the past and all that because he was a military. But after his NDE, he also quit everything he was doing, and now he also helps the homeless. So this dedication to help others, this interest in common wellness is something that I have seen in many cases. So I guess that you have too, Pooja.
Yes, for sure, AJ, for sure. Everything you're saying is resonating very deeply with me because my guests talk about the same things. They do. And I've read your book, Stairway to Heaven. I love it. I love how you've organized all the stories based on all the commonalities, but they're very unique as well. They're very unique as well. So,
Yes, they are.
yeah. And that's one thing I find very beautiful about these near death experiences. I feel like each one is customized to the person and what they need, for their
Yes.
lives in that moment as well. But definitely appreciate your book, and I so much to unpack from what you just shared, AJ. I don't even know where to begin because I'm just sitting here thinking, wow, like, can I start with that poem that you heard? Can you repeat that because that really sat with me, and I don't want to miss something. I want my audience to hear it once more.
In the beginning was the one, but the one was alone, and he wanted to play. So he divided himself into two and gave number two amnesia, and thus the game began.
It's so profound and so beautiful, AJ. Sometimes, I think when I'm sitting alone reflecting, like I once had this thought that God or creator or source is like an artist that's just gone wild on a canvas with all these colors. And that sounds like it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And there are references of this oneness of God in different religions. There are references not only in Christianity, but I found, like I said, in different religions. And one of the bases of Buddhism is to learn that what we call selfhood or the personal self is only a delusion, an illusion, false. The Hindus also talk about Maya as well as the Buddhists. Maya is the veil of illusion. They say that reality is not what we perceive. What we perceive here is basically a dream, an illusion, and that what we consider our ego is also a dream, an illusion. So, this teaching of Maya and how to differentiate true reality, which is non dual, which is a oneness, from the illusory world, which is dualistic or dual, and it involves the ego. Establishing this difference, I think, is the basic root of all religions. Jesus pointed out that you should not gather treasures in this world, that you should gather them in heaven. So many people in different religions have mentioned things like that, you know. Rumi, which is one of the most renowned Sufist teachers, he said, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." So this also resonates with what I experienced. He also talked about oneness, and he said that oneness cannot be understood by the intellectual mind. So this is also worth mentioning. Another religion that talks about oneness or the one is Taoism. In the book, The Tao Te King, the author Lao Tzu, he talks about the one or the Tao. And when he begins this book, he says, the Tao that can be told or the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. So, what does this mean? That when we talk about God, the God that we're referring to is only an imagined picture or an imagined representation. We are not really talking about God, you know, this infinite energy beyond all dimensions, and that is unconceivable. They use the word ineffable, beyond words. So whenever you talk about it, the same thing happens with anyone. When I say puja, who am I referring to? I have a mental picture of puja, but does the word puja for me contain everything that you are? No. So this world of words is limiting, and it's part of the illusory world. Every time we talk about something, Jesus, yeah, okay, you have a picture of Jesus in your mind. I have another. So when we refer to these beings or God, we each have our own representation, and we are actually limiting it. So, and it happens with everything. How can you define love? Okay. When you say love, does it really mean that what we feel? No, it's just an abstract word. We agreed that love would represent that feeling. But that's why Zen Buddhism claims that the understanding of spirituality cannot come through reasoning or through words. And that is the basis of spirituality. It's not something you can achieve by the through the intellect. It's something that you need to experience.
For sure, AJ. I once heard a Franciscan priest by the name of Richard Rohr. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he once said that all language is metaphor because we're just desperately trying to, each one of us, communicate something. It means something to me, but it could mean a different thing to you.
Of
So for
course, when I
sure.
say think of a dog, the dog that you imagine has nothing to do with the dog I imagine.
Yes. And yet it just breaks my heart how much division we have in this world based on, our ideas and our limited language and everything else. So for sure. But I do have a question about that because, for people like you and people like your guests that have experienced that oneness or been on the other side, and then you come back into this world, even though we know, it's an illusion, but we're still living the everyday reality. How does it feel to process two different realities at the same time?
Well, it's almost impossible. I think it's a slow transformation that requires facing your shadow,
Mm,
accepting that we are not perfect, dealing with our imperfect self,
mhm,
and not pretending to be who we are not. In
mhm,
my case, I never pretended, and I still don't pretend to be a spiritual teacher or a spiritual guide. No, I have much work left to do. However, I think that my present work with near death experiences and my YouTube channel and my interviews with NDE researchers is actually helping others get rid of that fear of death or at least diminish it.
mhm,
But regarding facing our shadow, that is a process that is very hard to do because it requires something that is super hard. And that is if you consider that God is oneness, what do you do with the devil? What do you do with Satan? What do you do with evilness in the world? What do you do with murderers? What do you
mhm,
do with all that? And the answer is it is all part of oneness. So, does Satan exist? Well, it may exist in you if you believe in him, but even if he does, he is also part of oneness. So, it's really hard to define or explain, but the dark side has a reason to be there. First of all, this dual world requires, since duality is basically two sides of a coin, need in this dual world, you need to have evil in order to have goodness. But that evil is relative. Evil, in the end, is there to give you a lesson or give the world a lesson. And if we don't really die, if death is an illusion because we continue living, and according to many, we reincarnate and all that, then does it matter if someone kills you? In the end, that is part of a lesson you are receiving. So, was it bad? The World War II, was it bad? The bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were they bad? Yes, they were bad because they killed a lot of people. However, if you see Japan today, it is a consequence of the bad things that happen. And when we learn how to walk, we fall, get hurt. But if we get back and continue, we learn that all the bad things that happened to us were there for a reason. Also, when you have had several romantic relationships that have failed, each time ended one of these relationships, you feel like it's the end of the world. Wow, this is terrible. But then a couple of years later, when you meet someone else, you say, well, the best thing that could have happened was getting rid of my ex. No, it's all relative. It's all relative. Why is everything relative? Because you cannot define good and evil.
Really hard, AJ, to I understand what you're saying. One of my favorite quotes from Rumi is actually where he says, "There's a place beyond right and wrong, and I'll meet you there." Right?
Yes, there is a place. The thing is, I really was confused by this for many years, and I also found in the Bible, there's the book of Job. The book
Mm.
of Job begins when Satan goes to heaven. What? Did he go to heaven because he behaved well? No, no. He went to heaven to have a talk with God. Why? Because he works for God. So he went there and said, okay, I have tempted everyone, some have been tempted, some have not. But there's one guy, well, I haven't been able to tempt him. His name is Job. Do you give me permission to tempt him? And God said, well, you're not gonna make Job fall. I'll give you permission. So what does this mean? That the devil is not there to do any wrong as in essence. He's there to tempt people so they realize their mistakes. So you have to separate evil from what we know as Satan, at least in the scriptures, because the way that Satan is presented in Job is like he is like the emissary, the bad guy. You know, when you are in many movies, when you see two police officers, one is the bad one and the other one is the good one. Seems to have there seems to be a need to tempt people and also to scare them, especially if people are childish or when we are kids. When we are growing up, we really need to tell right from wrong. It's very necessary when you're a kid, don't go out in the street naked, don't pee in the middle of the street, whatever. They start establishing norms. And the notion of good and bad is important during those years. But as you grow up, mature, and become an adult, you need to know that it is relative, because what is seen as bad in one country, in another country, it may be completely as accepted. Eating cats. Well, there are some countries where eating cats is accepted and it's normal. So there are so many things. So good and bad is relative. And of course, we don't want to kill anyone. We don't want to do harm to others. And that's what near death experiences teach us. And that's what Jesus said. Jesus said, I only have two commandments, because the apostles said, hey, which of the 10 commandments are the most important? The 10 commandments. No, 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 no. There are only two commandments in which all the rest are based on. First, love God above more than anything. And the second one is love each other.
And AJ, thanks for bringing that up, because he said, love God. And then he said the second one is like the first one. So, and then he says, love each other. So he brings them both on the same level, too.
Yes, yes. So why does he say this? Well, if you consider that in essence we are one, whatever you do to someone else, you're doing it to yourself and you're also doing it to God because you are God. So wow, what is the main lesson here? That
Yeah.
you need to love God beyond everything because you are God and everyone else is God too. Everything we see around us is God. So basically, if you keep that norm, you will not harm anyone. So,
Mhm.
although the notion of good and bad exists, doesn't, although you may perceive that good and bad are relative and that they are not, if you keep these two commandments, there's no way you can do wrong.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So that's very profound. Thank you so much. Time has flown, AJ. I can't believe this because I have enjoyed listening to you so much, sharing from your wisdom and experience. But I do have one last question for you. Do you think, and this is very personal for me, because when I had my spiritually transformative experience, I was going to a small church and they did not know how to handle it. So, because their version of Jesus was different from what I was experiencing because I had some spirit encounters with Jesus, but it was different from the way I was being taught. They didn't know what to do with it. And so they thought, that I'm being deceived. So when a lot of the people that are having NDE and other experiences, like such as yourself, I also think you did have an NDE, AJ. That's just my belief from people that I've interviewed, and then people come back and they're trying to share their experiences, right? So where do you think we are as a society in helping those who've had NDEs to process that and not invalidate it? Do you think clergy and medical professionals need more training, or do you think we're getting there?
I think we are still way behind. I think that most medical doctors consider NDEs hallucination, product of the person's imagination. I think that in this world, science is basically materialistic. This means that they think that only matter exists, that the spirit is something false, that there is no spirit because you can't see it, you can't measure it. And the wide majority of scientists defend this materialistic view. However, quantum physics is showing us that something different. The universe only exists when it is observed. The
Mm.
universe is interconnected. The universe is actually placed along with us and gives rise to what is known as synchronicities. So, and one of the main findings is also the non-local condition of consciousness, and that consciousness can exist without the brain. But there are many scientists who still haven't joined this new view, and it's slowly growing. But I do think this is the beginning of the merge between science and spirituality.
Mhm.
I think in the end, although they each specialize in different fields, but I do think that science is beginning to explain that there are other dimensions,
Mhm.
that the consciousness does survive the body or the brain, that there is, that life is eternal, and that, energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed. So after we die, we basically continue existing, but in a different frequency. But I think that people who have had a traumatizing or a disturbing NDE sometimes are still sent to psychiatrists. I know one person who was sent to a mental institution. I know several people who are really confused. I was very confused in the beginning until they start sharing with other near death
Mhm.
experiencers. Unless they start sharing with them, they feel isolated. But once they start either watching YouTube videos or meeting actual persons in like we do in IANS in the sharing groups, then they begin to understand that they are not as isolated as they thought. And although most psychiatrists and psychologists cannot really help you with this because they are not trained or they do not accept that NDEs are real, there are organizations like IANS and
Mhm.
also Spiritual Awakenings International who can help people who have gone through these experiences. I also know a psychologist, Valerie Varan, and she specializes in what she calls quantum psychology, and she helps people.
Yeah.
Valerie Varan, she's a
Mhm.
specialist in quantum physics and also in quantum psychology, and she actually helps people integrate their experiences. So there are several ways of facing this and integrating these experiences.
Thank you for sharing that, AJ. And I know you have a Facebook community as well. So I'll make sure to include that link in the description. And our time has come to an end, but I know I could go on forever and pick your brain on all the things that you have learned. But thank you so much. Is there a best way that folks can connect with you other than the Facebook community?
Yes, they can write to me through my email, ajparbook at gmail.com. AJ Parr Books. I also work helping people publish their books. I have published several books by near death experiencers. I just released a book that was authored by Dr. Raymond Moody and Paul Perry, and they had already published it. So they needed a second edition. They wanted to publish it directly on Amazon, and that's what I do. I help people publish their books on Amazon. I am also working on two more. I have published like 10 books by near death experiencers. I also help them out. They want to write their books. That's why my email is ajparbooks at gmail.com. I will also include my Amazon author page link, my YouTube video, my channel, and whatever you need, I can share with you.
Yes, absolutely. I think I have all your links, and I will be very happy to put them in the description so people can find you, AJ. Thank you once again for taking the time to be on this show.
You're welcome.